Hi, everyone. Nice to be back with you for Dad's Planning Politics. Hi, Freddie.
Hi, father. I never know what to call you. Father, dad. Hey, Mark.
It's
Hey,
Dad's
Mark. What's
Planning
going on?
Politics.
Dad's playing
Dad.
politics. Hey, dad. Hey, dad. Yeah, good to be back. I think this is episode 13.
It is Lucky
Mm.
13. So we're going to
Lucky?
chat today about, in some parts of the world, 13 is lucky.
Yeah, okay.
Tariffs, DEI, the Super Bowl, which has happened yesterday our time, Gaza, the continuing saga, and then lastly, the phone call that Albo had with Donald Trump
Yeah.
regarding the
In
latest round of
our
tariffs.
Australian segment, I think we've decided to
In an
call it.
Australian segment.
At the end of every episode, we're always going to focus on Australian politics and go into that a little bit, and that's going to be our Australian segment. So,
Okay.
just to give it a fun little label to spice things up. So where are we going to start with tariffs?
Tariffs.
You want to lead that?
Oh, sure.
That's good.
Okay, so time moves quickly in the Trump era. And so a week or so ago, there was 25% tariffs put on Canada and Mexico and an additional 10% on China.
Mm-hmm.
Both Mexico and Canada have had a stay of execution for a month, whilst there's further discussions there. I haven't heard much about China in terms, I think they've put some tariffs on the US in terms of liquid natural gas and some other energy materials. And so that's interesting, the swings and roundabouts here. That could be incredibly beneficial for Australia, because where are they going to get their liquefied natural gas from if they don't get it from the US?
Yeah, that's true.
Australia is on the doorstep. So that's interesting. There's talk of EU tariffs. And then whilst he was on Air Force One, he talked about the tariffs on both steel imports and aluminium imports into the US. And this would be global, with no exceptions, to protect the US steel and aluminium industry. And so that's the latest thing to come to pass.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think if they need protections that are that vast, including every single country in the world, maybe they need to rethink their steel and steel and aluminium industries. Don't you think? If the only way they're going to keep them alive is by restricting every single other economy.
But Freddie, I'm not sure it's just about keeping the industries alive. The strategy is to ideally get rid of income tax that have all these tariffs, etc., fund the slimmed down US government.
Okay.
So that's the wild
That's
strategy.
the Doge
here.
Department
The
of
Doge
Government
strategy.
Efficiency, I guess, speaking again. Yeah, a lot of stuff has happened with Elon as well. Do we want to mention some of that, of all the tech pros that he's been getting involved and all the tech students that he's been bringing into the government?
Well, yes, I think they're students, but I think they're trusted young colleagues of Elon's who, I've read quite a lot of them work for Tesla and other companies and SpaceX.
Famously
So these are some of well, no, those companies are very successful, right? So these people
But
are no
success
doubt
doesn't mean they're
super
trustworthy.
smart.
Donald Trump is very successful. Do we trust him?
Yeah, well, that's the big question. The challenge is they've been given access to all the records in the US. So that's the interesting thing from a security point of view. And what are the challenges there? That's what's scaring people who traditionally deal with technology and deal with these security protocols of governments, that these people have been given full access.
I mean, I don't know about you, but if I were to say give access to a few of my friends to all the Australian security records, I don't think the Australian government would be too happy about that. Do you know what I mean? It's all well and good to say they're trustworthy, but they're not trustworthy, government clearance level trustworthy in no way at all. I mean, even the people in government aren't at that level of trustworthiness. So how can we expect a few students to be there?
True, but I was also reading that the cost of the US government has spiraled in the last few years. So there is some cause to be slimming down government somewhat. I'm not advocating that what they're doing is proportional, but this slimming down does make sense to a degree. But if you throw out the baby with the bathwater, i.e. US aid, which has been an incredible success of US soft power for the last 50 or 60 years, it opens the door for China to fill that void. So I think China must be rubbing its hands together in terms of influencing Africa and different parts of the world, because as the US departs with US aid, China will come in.
Yeah, and I think we went into that a little bit in our last episode. But yeah, ridiculous. I wonder every day I wake up and I think, is he stupid or does he know what he's doing? Is this some sort of strategy? Is he trying to put America into a spiral where it just keeps heading downwards? Is that his ultimate goal?
No, I think they absolutely know what they're doing. They're very smart people. They are testing the limits of US democracy to see how far they can get and how quickly they can get there. And their strategy so far is working because there's not a great deal of resistance. The Democratic Party is missing in action. Congress is very slow to respond.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, their strategy. Move quickly, break glass, and see whether anyone stops you.
I just want to say, in response to your earlier statement, testing the limits of US democracy, I don't think they're testing shit. I think that they're just fully becoming an autocratic regime. This is not democratic anymore.
Well,
the
you
way that
can't
it's
say that
working,
yet.
you can't put an oligarchy into power and have people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, etc., calling the shots who have not been elected via the democracy that you're lovingly talking about, and have that be a democracy.
No, but they've got the authority of the president. So,
No.
there's a lot of people who work in the public service in Australia who are not elected.
Do they have the same power as Albanese does? No. In no
Some
way
of them have
do they
enormous power. The head of Treasury, for example, in Australia has enormous power.
Yes, but was he not elected or worked his way to that
public
position?
servant.
Yes, but he earned his way up the ranks within a government department.
It's only old people who
Within
earn
a
their way
government
up
department.
that can be making good decisions.
Where does that
Well,
even come from?
These young
Elon
technos.
is fairly old. He's not that young.
Well, everything's relative.
To me, he is fairly old, and compared to a lot of the more progressive politicians in American politics at the moment.
But what do you think's going
Still
on with the
pretty old.
Democrats? Why are they missing in action?
I think that they're still a little bit frazzled after what happened, and they have no idea how to combat this. But we've been seeing that although the Democrats have been missing in action, there's been a massive cultural revolution that feels it's on the verge of happening.
Really?
Yes.
Like, where do you see this?
I would say, I think it's been in the murmurs. It's been among the Gen Z online. We've been talking about it. But if you didn't watch the Super Bowl yesterday, I did not, but I watched the halftime show because that's always the best part, regardless. And as we all know, Kendrick Lamar performed at the halftime show. And the song that he performed, Not Like Us, was famously a diss against another titan of the music industry. And so it's an interesting choice, first of all, to do such a song at an event that's meant to be uniting the American people and meant to be the pinnacle of, like American success, a song about hating on someone else. Interesting choice. Then you bring in the fact that the dancers were in the formation of an American flag. Everyone on stage was black.
Mm-hmm.
No one was not black, and it really showed the sign of unity.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have been calling it black nationalist.
Okay.
A lot of white nationalist people have been calling it black nationalist in response to it, and it's triggered a lot of people and upset a lot of people, Donald Trump I think included, because before Kendrick started performing, he said the revolution will be live streamed. I think it said the revolution will happen. You picked the right time but the wrong man. Obviously in reference to Donald Trump. There's no way it couldn't be.
Wow.
And it's pretty impressive that he had the guts to do something like that.
That is impressive, particularly given Trump is the first president to ever attend a Super Bowl, which is really amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you would think that they
had,
especially Biden, I would have expected he would have done something like that in the past.
And we had an Australian player who did incredibly well for Pittsburgh, and so nice to see that.
Nice to see that. And yeah, but it's interesting how a simple thing like a sports game, a sports final, obviously a big deal in America, can become such a political event.
But I think you are overblowing the pushback from your generation and stuff. I don't see much at the moment. Maybe it's very subtle, and maybe you're right. Maybe it will grow, but I feel like there's no resistance at the moment.
Well, he says he feels like there's no resistance, but I'm sure maybe some of you have seen the 50 states in a day protests that went on. It was a mass organization where like thousands and thousands of people came out across America in every single state and protested against the decisions of the Trump administration and against Elon's position in that. If you've even looked at American media recently, you would have seen the mass protests that have been going on. Because look, they elected him, but that doesn't mean half of the population, slightly less than half, doesn't hate him from the beginning and doesn't want him out of power.
But his popularity is still incredibly high. It hasn't dropped at all.
Do you have statistics to back that up?
Yeah, I was reading the other day about this. And so he's doing exactly what he said to his supporters that he would do. So they're pleased, the MAGA supporters.
Not everyone is pleased.
No, I'm not saying everyone, but the MAGA supporters.
I mean, I was looking in this in-depth thing of the Arab populations in different states, and it was going and talking to them and asking, this is only a few of them, this is not necessarily saying every single Arab American individual thinks this, but a few of them are saying that they regret voting for Donald Trump and that they couldn't within their own conscience vote for Biden considering he had, kept the whole genocide happening in Gaza. So they had to vote for an alternative and now they regret that.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. I'm sure many people
of course they regret it. And they feel guilty. They feel everyone around them who is telling them not to vote for Trump, they have nothing to say to them because they made a mistake. And they don't then deserve to suffer for that mistake, but they made a mistake and it must feel awful to have to live with that for the next 4 years. I mean, it's only the beginning and so much has happened already.
Absolutely. So is that a good segue into talking about Gaza?
Yeah, I would say it's a good segue.
Do you want to lead off? Or?
Yeah, of course. So the Middle Eastern Riviera. Anyone heard of that? Anyone seen that on any travel websites popping up recently? Because obviously, as we've heard, Donald Trump has decided that he wants to raise what's left of Gaza completely to the ground, move every single person out with no right to return to the area, and completely build the whole place up again into an international area of business and relaxation. So,
like Singapore or Dubai or something like that.
Except it's owned by America and feels very similar to imperial moves by emperors in the Ottoman Empire and the Roman Empire. It feels very old world, I would say.
Look,
not something we typically experience.
This is a complex topic, but, thinking outside the box is not a bad idea in this regard because this whole world, the Middle East, has been going on for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So what we've been doing is not going to solve the future scenario. Now, the problem with it is fundamentally telling the Palestinian people to move is like ethnic cleansing, right? Because that is their homeland.
It's not like ethnic cleansing. It is ethnic cleansing, and which goes against the boundless international human rights laws.
So Trump's proposal is that the people move to Jordan and to Egypt. Now, they're not playing ball, nor is Saudi actually, but Trump has just said, okay, well, I'm going to cut off aid to Egypt and Jordan unless you do this. And he's got a meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan tomorrow. The challenge there is that more than 50% of the population already of Jordan is Palestinian already. And if they took another million Palestinian, 80% of Jordan would be Palestinian. So it would destabilize Jordan, which has always been a bastion of stability in the Middle East. So that's a very interesting
Would
thing.
Would it necessarily destabilize them?
Because it sort of becomes like a Palestinian state. Yes, because people are...
But there's nothing fundamentally wrong with a Palestinian state. There's something fundamentally wrong with a Palestinian state in that position because of the conflict that's been going on between Israel and Palestine for so long.
But like any people, it would be like Australia accepting a whole lot of immigrants, let's say, from Indonesia, and therefore they made up 80% of the population, people from Indonesia versus Australia. Australians would react to that just as Jordan.
But as you just said, it's not the same because you said that a large group of people within Jordan already are made up of Palestinian ethnic
it's the balance
background.
There. That's what they're worried about in Jordan. But it'll be interesting how they respond because they get billions of dollars in aid from the US to help support all these refugees.
Well,
already there.
interesting that this is the aid that remains. I thought Trump had this whole dialogue how he's cutting off aid to every country other than the US. Convenient that he's keeping it for some countries and that he's still using it as a power play.
Oh, sure. I think he uses tariffs as a power play. He uses aid, but maybe this wasn't US aid. Maybe it was specific aid to Jordan and Egypt for this refugee crisis, I would imagine. Right. But that's going to be fascinating how that rolls out. The question I have in this whole thing, I get that it's ethnic cleansing, but where is the alternative proposal? Where is the alternative proposal from a collection of countries in the Middle East or the EU or something, to rebuild part of Gaza whilst the people move to the south and they rebuild the north or whatever? I hear nothing about this.
Well, maybe you're on the wrong side of the media because I've heard stuff about it and I've heard a lot about other Middle Eastern countries such as Egypt, such as Jordan, coming together and trying to find a solution. But the solution that Trump has proposed is not even an option. You're saying where is the alternative, but it's not an option that you can take. Because regardless of how horrific it is and how immoral it is to treat 2 million real human people like that who've already been suffering for 2 years, it also gives precedence to every other autocratic leader all around the world that they are allowed to go about and ethnic cleanse any minority that they have in their country, and there will be absolutely no retribution.
But it is frustrating for me, Freddie, because you think about how badly they've been treated by Hamas over the last several years, right?
The Palestinians.
Yeah, the Palestinians. Terribly. Okay?
And by Israel.
By Israel, but Hamas started the thing.
Yes, but the Palestinians have been treated by Israel terribly over the past several years.
Has been intimately involved in this, right? So where is the alternative strategy? That's what I'm missing here in this whole thing, right? And who's going to fund it? Because the US is not going to fund that.
I think that there's a lot more discourse in other Middle Eastern states than you think there is, and a lot more support. Jordan said that they were about to enter in a war with Israel unless the ceasefire happened, before the ceasefire was agreed on the 19th of Jan.
Right.
Jordan said they were ready to enter in a war with Israel because of how horrific it'd gotten. They were ready to place it all on the line for that. I think if they're willing to do something like that, or at least state that they are, then they're willing to come up with a solution.
Well, I hope to see it.
I hope to see it as well.
You've been waiting a long time in the Middle East. People have talked about these solutions for, 40 years. This is the problem.
But it's also interesting. The Middle East is a very different place than it was even 8 years ago when Trump was first in power. Think of everything that's happened with Syria and the end of the Assad regime. Iran has advanced its nuclear weapons capabilities enormously since then as well. So lots of stuff has been shifting and happening.
But they're not going to allow that. US and Israel are not going to, they're going to bomb Iran if they get close to having a nuclear weapon. They've said that's the line in the sand.
I think they're getting pretty close.
Okay, well, let's watch this space, see what happens with Iran.
But obviously Israel did weaken Iran somewhat by helping to dismantle the Assad regime.
Yep. And what's with Gaza, what's with Hamas questioning the ceasefire now? I mean, this is just crazy. They agree a ceasefire and then don't continue with it.
I think it's also important to mention, though, that after the ceasefire was agreed, like we talked about in last episode or the episode before, there was still bombing.
I know, but that was a few weeks ago, right? I don't think it's still
But the ceasefire was agreed and the bombing kept going on for a few days. I get it, but
it feels to me like they're playing games, and it's kind of scary that they're playing games with, well, that's what they do, playing games with people's lives. It is scary.
It is terrifying, yes, but it's also terrifying to be in that position and think that you're finally free from this hellfire that you've been experiencing, and then for someone like Donald Trump to come out only a few days ago, interesting timing, huh, and say, let's kick out every single Palestinian person out of their home that they finally thought that they could go back to. Interesting timing, don't you think, that happens to be when Hamas starts reneging on their on their hostage deal?
That could have been a cause for it. Perhaps.
Yeah, because look, what is the ceasefire deal if they're going to be kicked out of their home anyway, regardless, and they're not going to have statehood?
but that'll be fascinating. I don't think Saudi's in favor of that either. So I don't know how it happens if Saudi's not in favor, because there's no money to do this and there's no commitment from the Middle East. I mean, Jordan and Egypt could maybe agree in the end, because if they're going to be bankrupt as countries and civil unrest, maybe they have to agree.
Yeah, but you know, every specialist on the subject across the world has instantly decried it as one of the most horrific ideas to ever come out of America. It's the furthest that they've ever interfered in foreign state relations in this way. I mean, it's just incredibly ironic. How long will Trump supporters support him, you know, intervening in foreign relations when all he talks about is how he wants America to become independent?
Correct.
And not spend all its funding on the international.
That's the big question. Does this require US boots on the ground in Gaza? And if it does, that's the Achilles heel of this whole thing.
It does. There's no way that they can remove all these people.
US people.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think that it's impossible. It's not even worth talking about. It's just another attempt by Donald Trump to be getting in the news, so no one can forget about it.
Certainly being successful, getting in the news every day. Shall we move to the Australian segment?
Yes, let's.
Would you like to begin? Or?
No, you start.
Okay, so news today in Australia is that Albo had his phone call with Donald Trump this morning, our time, and supposedly it was a good call, and Trump agreed that he would like to see the US develop economically together with Australia, and he recognized that we are one of the few countries with a trade surplus with the US, and in fact we just wrote a check for $800 million, which is our first down payment on the AUKUS submarines. So I find it fascinating. Poor Albanese, he's going to soon be going to an election, and he's being held up to get an exception to these tariffs on aluminium and steel. And if he doesn't, the opposition will say, well, you failed in your relationship with Trump. I think it's a hard road to hoe to get an exception, because Trump has said it's all countries.
I know, it's an incredibly hard road to what was that expression used? Road to hoe. I've never heard that before, but all right, let's run with it. I think it's also interesting you're talking about, obviously, the tariffs that Trump's putting on other countries. You look to the UK. I've been thinking about this a lot with Keir Starmer, right? He's Albanese's equivalent, right? He's the Labour Prime Minister of the UK. Albo is the Labour Prime Minister of Australia. So they should have fairly similar rhetoric on what's happening right now, but Keir Starmer has been even more defiant of Trump than Albanese is. And Albanese is still not being supported for his defiance of Trump and for speaking back against him. So, and he's not being controversial.
Big difference. Starmer still has 4 years in power.
That's
Albanese
true.
has an election in a few months.
That's true.
And Dutton is mirroring a mini version of Trump. So it's very dangerous for the Labour government.
Yeah. It's almost hilarious how unoriginal Dutton is being. He's honestly just taking every single policy in Trump's playbook and rewriting it for his own use.
He's reading the zeitgeist at the point in time. The thing I agree with you. I wish Albanese would be stronger, because I saw Malcolm Turnbull, our former Prime Minister, interviewed last night, and he said he'd be very tough. He'd rip up AUKUS if they didn't make an exception.
And he was a Liberal Prime Minister.
Yeah, so I think it's not a bad idea, because not only do we have a trade surplus with the US, but we're investing hugely in their industrial base and their submarine base with this billions and billions of dollars. So.
And if Australia, a fairly independent country, a democratic country, one of the only truly Western democratic countries around right now, does not stand up against Trump, who will?
But the challenge is, I wish Albanese would do it, but politically it's very dangerous, right? Because you get a lot of blowback, over coming months, and that's just when the election is. And would the Australian people give him credit for that, or would they say he's stupid for riling the beast of Donald Trump?
Yeah, I really don't know. I haven't done the right policy analysis yet at university to be able to decipher that or not. But you would hope that people would give him some respect just for making a stand on something, because at the moment he feels scared. He looks like he's scared and he's not ready to make a statement, not ready to do anything really that sets him apart. He's trying to just be a goody two-shoes and hope that gets him over the finish line, but I don't think it will. Don't you think?
No, that's true. And I heard that Zoe Daniels, who's the teal for Goldstein in Victoria, was talking about that, how the government should just find its courage and do something and do some things. And because they've had some good achievements, etc., but they just seem
Like they're
super
petering
worried
off.
about Trump being, in Dutton being the mini Trump, and how do they combat that?
But it's almost like that fear of losing is
Will
going to
cause them
cause
to
their
lose.
own demise. Incredibly ironic, but that's the nature of today and the political world we live in. So-
Anyway, Freddie's heading back to Canberra this afternoon, so we will be doing our podcasts with her in Canberra and me in Sydney moving forward, so watch out for that change. Hope you enjoyed today's session and look forward to chatting with you soon. Again, please tell your friends and family and anyone might be interested in our podcast, and
Please
follow
like
us and like us.
follow. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.